Good evening, dear community, and very welcome to our next rooftop talk together with Stadler Völkel, attorneys at law. And we have a very interesting topic today as well, digital health opportunities and legal challenges for HealthTechs. Very important topic. We've been discussing about digital health and HealthTechs quite a lot, and we have a very distinguished panel today to join me on this topic. And I might introduce you first, Sabria Lagoun, manager at Health Hub Vienna. Sabria, welcome. Then we have my co-host, Jeannette Gorzala, lawyer at Stadler Völkel Rechtsanwälte. Welcome.
Thank you.
You'll be explaining the topic a little bit at the beginning. Why did we choose it? Why did you guys choose it? Then we have Popoff, investment manager at Calmstorm Ventures. Marine, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Lukas Seper, co-founder and head of growth at XUND. Lukas, servus.
Servus.
So, Jeannette, can I start with you first? Why did we choose this topic? What's behind it? What kind of legal and regulatory issues are we going to be discussing tonight?
The term digital health, MedTech and e-technology has been quite present during the last times. We are referring to the digitalization and appliance of new technologies in the medical field. Of course, every time when we have digitalization aspects, information technology, there are, of course, some legal ramifications, data privacy, and medical device regulations, and that's something we will be discussing. The recent COVID situation has, of course, sped up some developments, and this is why we chose this topic, because it's very interesting, this boost for digitalization and also the importance of e-health in recent times.
Perfect. Let's introduce our other guests. Lukas, what do you do? What is XUND?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for the info. So my name is Lukas, and I'm one of the three co-founders actually of XUND. We are based in Vienna and started the company almost more than 2 years ago. And we have developed a digital health assistant that empowers patients to make informed decisions. And our goal is to improve the accessibility and the quality of healthcare.
What exactly is the product? How does it work?
Yeah, so basically, if you have questions regarding your health, typically it's starting with symptoms, then we provide you with medical certified information. And our goal is not only the self-assessment, but also the navigation to the right point of treatment.
So just in terms of regulation that we're going to be discussing later, you mentioned certified. Can you diagnose certified, or is it just the first information that you can then take further to a doctor?
Yeah, it's the latter one. So we do not diagnose and we do not replace the doctors. We make a preliminary assessment based on the symptoms and the general profile information of the user, and then navigate towards the point of treatment.
Sabria, I know that you don't know the pitch of every startup that you have, but that sounded a bit similar to Symptoma. Do you see any parallels to the product?
Yeah, so, of course, we need to get to know more about you, but we have quite a lot of interesting startups in Health Hub. Our aim is to connect the community of not only startups, but also pharmaceutical companies, insurances, health providers, and we see a lot of very interesting developments in this field, yeah.
Health Hub Vienna started, I think, 3-4 years ago as a very, very strong, let's say, incubator and accelerator, combining a lot of corporate partners on the insurance side, on the pharmaceutical side, on the health side, and international startups. What's the status quo? What exactly do you do at the current stage?
There are a lot of international startups, and the idea is to bring all of the knowledge and innovation from all over the world and integrate it into the Austrian ecosystem. Our aim has been to promote this innovation, and with the rise of COVID-19 this year, it has been shown very useful to have all of these solutions, and people have been coming to us a lot. We are now talking to public players as well to understand what are their needs, and we really believe that we have the power to really push innovation forward into the healthcare system.
Lukas, did you have a boost in the corona times? Did you have the contrary to boost?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is a momentum right now for our industry, and the most important fact was that it's much more easier to talk to corporates, to the relevant stakeholders in Austria and in Europe. So definitely that was kind of a game changer for all of us.
We'll be talking about that with all of you. Marine, last but not least, you are investment manager at Calm Storm Ventures. It's a new boutique fund. I like to call it the founders fund, so to say. It has a philosophy of founders being very active, helping their startups. Could you explain it in your words? What is Calm Storm as of today?
Absolutely. So we're a new fund. We registered actually in February, and we are a boutique venture capital fund, like you mentioned. So we co-invest at very early stage startups, and while we are actually sector agnostic, most of our portfolio is in the digital health tech space. So there are several reasons for that. On the one hand, it's because of our personal experiences. So Lukanos, our founding partner, he was general partner and CFO of Speedinvest, and he was managing most of the digital health tech part of the fund there. So he has a lot of experience here. And then on the other hand, it's because we look for purpose-driven founders, and we've seen in the pandemic that most of these purpose-driven founders were in the digital health tech space. And so that is why we focused on that. We look for founder market fit. We look for people who have kind of a capability to calm the storm, and that's why we call ourselves Calm Storm, right? And we look for people with leadership capabilities, people who can really bring a company forward.
What role do founders play when you invest in startups? You have a big network of different founders who invested in your fund. How much involved do they get? What can a founder, another founder that invest in, expect as a support from your side?
So actually, there is an entire support that we try to provide to our founders, and that's through the academy. So we have this network of supporting partners who are not only investors in our fund, but who are also experienced founder, people who have already built up a startup, who have maybe sold it already or even went on the stock exchange. And so these people who are invested in the fund are providing their insights to our portfolio founders. And so this is through the academy, and this is hence what we provide for our founders.
Maybe the same question or similar question to you. Have you been investing during the corona, or did you have a pause, so to say, during the corona?
No, we've been really active actually. We've invested in 4 months in 12 startups. Oh. So we're still actively investing, not at the same pace, of course, but we're very eager to meet new founders and new startups.
Lukas, she's looking at you quite strongly. We'll do that after again. Jeannette, now let's talk about two different legal aspects of today's discussion. We have the medical device regulation, MDR, on the one hand, and then the whole data protection aspect of medical health startups on the other side. Maybe let's first touch upon the medical device regulation as the so to say, the validity or start of this regulation was postponed to next year. What does that mean? First of all, what happened? What does it regulate? And what does that mean for startups, especially this extra year of time to prepare for it?
I'm glad you touched on the medical device regulation, because in particular with digital health companies, this is a key regulation and a key factor. Just to give you an idea in a nutshell what the scope of the medical device regulation kind of like regulates, in particular medical devices, but also software. And due to the implementation of the new medical device regulation, this regulation now explicitly also refers to any apps and devices involved in the prediction or in the monitoring of diseases. And so I think most of the health startups are trying to provide digital assistance, digital tools, also maybe from your experience in the Health Hub. And so this is a key point of regulation. If you fall in the scope with this regulation, you need first to approve your tool, which can be a very complex process, I'm sure you know, and you need to fulfill certain regulatory requirements like data security, documentation, and so on. This can be quite burdensome. So, and the original directive is from 2017 and should have been effective kind of like May this year, and as you already mentioned, due to the COVID pandemic, they postponed the effective date to May next year. So this is a huge chance also for digital health startups, which gives them additional time to prepare.
So how did the startups, especially in the health hub, let's say, react originally when they found out that this regulation here is coming in place? What would that mean operatively for them?
Yeah, so what we hear a lot from startups is, of course, it's important to be in a framework where things are regulated when we're talking about health, which is a very sensitive topic. But what they would like is to have some sort of national framework in the sense of maybe a sandbox. So there's this financial fintech sandbox coming in September in Austria. And this is really something that digital health startups are pushing for in the field of digital health. Yeah.
Why do you think we don't have something like the digital health startup sandbox? Is it, I don't know, too complicated on the side of technology, or would it be as easy as for fintechs?
I don't know the difficulty of the fintech aspect. I know it will be for sure a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that is worthy of our efforts. Especially that we're going to deal with this pandemic for a while, and digital health solutions are really needed at the moment. And when I talk about digital health solution, I'm not only talking about telemedicine, but also about various other solutions that are empowering the patient, that are helping decrease the stress on the workflow of hospitals, and that are making this human and financial resources much more available for the real cases, for the important cases. Yeah.
Jeannette, when the directive is applicable to a startup, what does that mean? What do they have to comply with? What kind of process do they have to undergo?
So the medical device regulation differentiates between 4 different classes of medical devices. So it's very kind of like complicated, but you need to submit your medical device. You need to kind of like submit extensive documentation. They will be implementing a unique device identifier so they can track the device through the entire supply chain. So if there's some health risk, they can easier recall it. They will be implementing a European database for these medical devices. So it's kind of like quite some regulatory process to go through. And also I can second maybe this digital health sandbox is something very important, because what we are seeing in the market is kind of like a lot of collaboration between all stakeholders, so between startups, between funds and investors, and also between the classical stakeholders, which would be the doctors, the hospitals, and so on. So kind of like it's something collaborative, and of course always new technology is something you need to experience, you need to kind of like also have the technical and the practical perspective, and maybe such a digital health sandbox would be a way to collaboratively develop new health tech solutions together.
What's your estimate? How long is this, let's say, certification going to take when one startup needs to, let's say, apply for the approval under this regulation?
It depends. So kind of like basically it depends on how well prepared the startup is to undergo this regulatory process. And we can't quite estimate, but there are estimations that this new regulatory directive will cause some delay, at least 3 to 6 months, because of all the situation currently, because of the processing, because of the new criteria which will need to be established. So, and this additional year to prepare is of course something very welcome to the startups and companies which need to apply and to these regulations.
Marine, what's your point on that as an investor? Do you only invest in startups already certified, already successfully undergone under this regulation, or do you also give a chance to very early ones, as you mentioned? And what kind of game changer maybe will it be? This regulation will be also for the investors.
Yes. Well, like I mentioned, we invest in very early stage startups, and of course we don't expect our startups to already have accomplished everything. So we're also there to work with them on certain things, and that could also be regulatory issues. And yeah, of course, we see that these regulations are changing really fast, and sometimes it's just, we hope that we can kind of navigate through this changing landscape together. Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a deal breaker for you if a startup would approach and say, we still have to do the whole regulatory work?
No, it's not a deal breaker, of course. But it's something that is, if it's there, it's already, it's great, and it shows some traction. And of course, it's a great incentive for us to look deeper into the startup. But if we see that there is a great founding team, that there is that all the other pieces of the puzzle fit together, and that this is missing, then we say, well, we have to also go through that together. And yeah.
Lucas, what kind of implication this regulation has for your business?
Yeah. First, if I may, I want to come back to the regulatory sandboxes, because we are promoting this since a year, and maybe you guys can help us to promote it even more. I think that's because of this very complex ecosystem of stakeholders in Austria, especially within healthcare. It would be very important to have something like regulatory sandboxes. I mean, in Austria alone, we have to talk to the Hauptverband, we have to talk to the Ärztekammer, we have to talk to the Länder because of the federal system of Austria, we have to talk to all the healthcare institutions, to the patients, etc. So it's a very complex system, and such sandboxes would help us to experiment.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, so we're currently in the process of understanding the consequences of COVID-19 in Austria, and we're conducting a series of interviews with all of the stakeholders that you've mentioned, or most of them, to understand how did COVID change their point of view on digital health, and what are the first steps that we can take to improve the situation. And we are coming up with really interesting use cases, and I think when the results will be published, I think it's going to be very interesting for also for startups to see where they can einbinden. So
yeah, I think also we've been talking during the corona with some of the decision makers in the public sector, and they seem to be super open to talk to you guys, to us, to all the stakeholders, and also maybe to keep some of the corona regulations that were loosened up for.
I mean, even the Ärztekammer today is promoting telemedicine against the Hauptverband. So, I mean, times are changing. So 5 years ago, it was much more difficult for our colleagues and competitors, usually I say colleagues, so to start a business. Now, I mean, there is some momentum, and we can use that.
What does this regulation mean exactly for XUND? What would it change for you guys? Are you certified already?
So, well, it did change something. So we started with all the process. So mainly what you need to certify as a medical device is a comprehensive quality management system. So the device, when it's for the user, must be safe to use, and has to meet specific criteria, state of the art. So we had some in place, some we didn't, and over the past 8 months we established the quality management system. We had some regulatory issues, I would say, but tonight we will send out the last final beta batch. So we hope to launch the product in September.
Which already complies with the future regulation?
With the MDD, because maybe you can help me out then. But
I think it's the regulation which is currently in place before the new regulation turns effective, because the effective date was postponed 1 year. Yeah. So the regulation beforehand was not a directive, which is kind of like applicable in all member states. Mm-hmm. It was another regulation where the Austrian Medizinproduktegesetz, the Medical Product Act, applies, which is basically the basis, and the new regulation just adds on top of that.
And gives a clear framework of what a medical device is and what it is not.
Is it stricter than the current regulation in Austria, or does it loosen that regulation up?
It is stricter.
Okay.
So it imposes some more regulations, but it also kind of like depends on the product, because there are, as I said, several categories. So it may add up just a little bit.
Especially for software, it's much harder. So now, typically, we and our colleagues are class 1 device. It will be very likely class 2A.
But you're solely a software product?
Yes.
Okay. Just one. I should mention something. If I ask you something that is confidential, you don't have to answer. So, do you have investors on board? How do you finance yourself currently?
Yeah, we bootstrapped the first 2 years, and we closed our first institutional investment round 2 weeks before lockdown.
So what was the feedback of your investors in terms of regulation? Was that a necessity for them? Did they demand for you to comply with the regulation and then they would invest, or what do they think about that?
Well, to be honest, we signed the terms of the plan not being a medical device, and then some weeks before Christmas we said, well, we should do it, and they are fine. I mean, it's more a family office, so the lead investor is Mr. Haselsteiner, and accompanied by some business angels from Südtirol and Nordtirol, and they are fine now. And somebody said it before, it's also an entry barrier for other companies. So yeah, it's some struggle, but it helps us to improve our processes and improve the quality, and it's a competitive advantage too.
Should one digital health startup be in the phase of fundraising? Jeannette mentioned that this can, so to say, expand or add 3 to 6 months in the process of certification. Do they have to calculate this time into the fundraising process as well, in case some of the investors would demand?
Well, they have no choice, because beginning with MDR, they are very, very likely at least class 1.
Are there any, let's say, HealthTechs that would not fall into this applicability of this regulation?
Of course, I mean, the term HealthTech, MedTech is quite a broad term. So, of course, you can also have a HealthTech company that would not be subject to the MDR. The MDR, kind of like we already mentioned it before, is for, to frame it broadly, software that predicts or helps kind of like in the medical disease process to kind of like monitor this. So if you have a HealthTech startup which has not directly or not that strictly interlinked to monitoring or prognosing diseases, I think that would be possibly something that could not fall under the MDR. So if you just, I don't think, training videos without any link to disease or something like that, everything that is linked to disease and prognosis is highly likely to be subject to that regulation.
And
it
increases the manufacturer. So if the manufacturer says, well, we are no medical device, then as long as nobody stops him, then it's no medical device.
Let's take My Sugar as an example. One of the exited startups, they monitor, they help you, so to say, cope with your diabetes, remind you about when to take your shots and so on and so forth. Would they need to comply with this directive, for example?
I didn't directly analyze My Sugar, but I think they have some stripes where you test the sugar level, and they have an application, and kind of like in this
helps you monitor your disease.
Yes, I mean, kind of like from the first point of view, without examining it in detail, I would kind of like lean towards that they would be a medical device.
As far as I know, sorry, My Sugar, if I'm wrong, but they are already class 1, at least, if not already certified for MDR.
Just so we have some concrete examples.
But
and on the other hand, Runtastic would probably not be.
Runtastic wouldn't be a medical device because it's kind of like something like a fitness health app that kind of like monitors your calorie burn, kind of like the steps you take. So these things are kind of like fitness devices and not kind of like more related to tracking fitness and health, but not kind of like monitoring the disease, your blood pressure, some condition, the functioning of some health device, you have some possible stent or so. That would kind of like rather be related to disease than fitness.
Sabria, what's the impact of this regulation in your health hub portfolio? Just from the top of my mind, I think of Symptoma, I think of Medicus, I think of maybe some other startups. Could you just go through them and maybe explain us what does that mean for them?
So what I know about them is rather the question on the data protection part of the equation. So for example, Symptoma I think doesn't save data. Medicus keeps the data on the phone, so DocDoc is compliant with regulations from Europe and the US in terms of data protection. So there are solutions that allow the startups to let's say creatively be more safe also for the patients as well, and at least from the data point of view. I'm not an expert on medical regulations, but I know some examples that are quite interesting in this side.
But let's talk about data protection as well, as it's a second very important aspect of basically every startup, but even more so HealthTech startups, because you're dealing with personal data normally. Maybe, Jeannette, let's start with you again. Mm-hmm. What kind of scope of issues do arise for HealthTechs when complying with data protection regulations?
I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, digital health startups heavily rely on technology, processing data, and so on. By connecting this data, the medical professionals are able to connect the dots and kind of like improve disease diagnosis and disease prevention. But under the General Data Protection Act, so short the GDPR, health data, biometric data, genetic data is considered a special class of protected personal data, sometimes also referred to sensitive data. So every time you process this kind of data, you need a special legal reason and justification for being legally able to process this data. And as you already mentioned, there are several creative ways of managing this process. So you can anonymize, you cannot kind of like save personalized data at all. There are several ways to do this in a legally compliant manner.
Maureen, do you look at the data protection compliance, especially when you do the due diligence process on your startups?
Yes. Well, I mean, sure. Like data should be encrypted. It should be anonymized. Also, like there are other things that we look into, like the way that algorithms behave. Like for an AI, if you have that could be a risk that an algorithm learns something and then only represents a very small subset of the population, and that's something that needs to be mitigated. But yeah, when I think of data, we were talking about data and privacy. I have examples also of our portfolio founders who are also trying to undergo these regulations. And I think, for instance, a startup that's called Biloba, they're in France. And they have a medical chat app, so they connect patients and doctors with a very simple new way of interacting. It's not telemedicine, but it's texting. And they had, for instance, to go through compliance in France. It's called HDS compliance. But then in order to reach into the American market, then they had to go to the HIPAA compliance. So this is also kind of a challenge, and we of course look at that with the startups. Yeah.
Maybe that's a very interesting point that you made. Is the European regulation harmonized, or does it, so to say, differ from country to country, especially when you have startups expanding beyond the borders of their certification, let's call it that way? Jeannette.
From a data protection point of view, the GDPR is applicable in all EU member states, so this point is harmonized. And if you look kind of like where the GDPR is applicable, it has a quite wide nexus. So it applies to personal data of EU member state citizens. So you can also fall within the scope of the GDPR if you process this data and are actually not located in Europe. So this is to the GDPR.
Did you see any startups from your portfolio wanting to expand and had to comply with specifics of, I don't know, many countries? And what does that do to the internationalization ambitions of startups?
Yes, well, of course it's a challenge. And I mean, this company is the one that I have in mind right now. I think obviously when they want to go international, then they have to apply different sorts of regulation, but I agree with what you were saying as well. So
but maybe to add to this point, I mean, this is the one aspect is the data protection law, kind of like solely restricted to data protection and also the sensitive class of data, but there are or maybe national regulations kind of like adding to that. And given that the healthcare market and medical sector is kind of like a very specific and sensitive industry, there might be additional national regulations in every member state, and this is also something one needs to observe.
Absolutely.
Sabria, would you say that the data regulatory became one of the core features of the product from the very beginning when startups start to build their products, especially in the health tech space? Do they think data from day one, or is it something that comes later when they try to, I don't know, find an investor?
From a consumer perspective, definitely. I mean, I think consumers are much more aware of how much data, personal data, is processed by companies at the moment, and from a sell point perspective, it's very important whether you go B2C or B2B to understand really what is the data, where is it going and how is it processed and so on. In terms of these differences of regulations between countries, it's very interesting for us working with international startups who are, so basically the aim is to create pilot project between the partners, so the corporates and these startups. And some of them come from the US and they are looking to do some projects where, let's get in contact with the doctors, or let's get, and some things are just not allowed in Europe, and there's always this moment where you have to put everything in the same ground to kind of teach and educate also international startups about what's going on here. And
that's an interesting comparison. Would you say that our regulation slows down the innovation in Europe?
I think regulation is necessary for protection of citizens, for sure. But a lot of things could be improved in terms of framework from a technical perspective. We're talking now, for example, software compatibility. So we're developing pilot projects and little bubbles of health tech, and it's very hard to combine it with, for example, the doctor software. Or this is just some kind of examples where a lot of the startups are frustrated that this data accessibility, this data compatibility is definitely something that is a big topic.
That could be solved, if I understood correctly, with Sandboxes, at least at the first phase of development.
Teach how to handle regulatory, definitely how to handle this. There are a lot of ideas that are coming up from our interviews. For example, the idea of having a bit like an IT backbone, similar to what the Vienna Linien has, where you could access anonymized data or anonymized structured data and be able to. But this is still something that is in discussion. Of course, it's not going to happen very soon, I think.
Lucas, did you think of data aspects of your product from day one, or did it kick in later on when somebody screamed?
Well, we're not on the market yet, so one of the main differences in healthcare is the long development cycles. So we don't just develop an app over a weekend and launch it. So we started 2.5 years ago with the first concepts, and because my background is IT security, we had it in mind. But to be honest, one of the main problems also is that when you need to draft all the documents, all the GDPR compliant terms and conditions, privacy policy, etc., you need some cash flow, to be honest. Yeah? So it's also very costly to pay all the lawyers. So usually it's not the first thing you start with.
No, but this is a very good point. Name a figure. 100,000 K?
No.
50,000?
No, less. But even some...
But you need money.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important aspect. And that's what I was going to ask Marie, because you said long cycles of development of the product, which also means that it requires a lot of capital before it generates revenues.
Right.
So are you ready for that path? Are you ready to support startups longer than maybe it would be in consumers area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there is long cycles and there are longer cycles. So the long cycles that have to do with the digital health tech space, this is something that we are definitely focusing on, and of course we follow on, and that is our plan to follow our startups. When it comes to, for instance, startups with longer life cycles, so in the life science sector, this is something that a different type of fund is maybe more suited for following on, because of this fund size and dynamics, then this is just not our focus. But yeah, investment is definitely, there's lots of investment available, and I think especially in the pandemic, there is in the Q2 of this year, there was 33% more investment in digital health tech in the US than over the average of the past 3 years in that same quarter. So there is definitely a lot of attractions from the investors. They're bullish and they also want to invest in that space.
Sabria, you have, for example, Unica Ventures as one of the founding members of Health Hub Vienna, and other funds that are also, so to say, in your ecosystem. Did you also see the increase of investment in the Health Hub Vienna, so to say?
So definitely the increase in terms of the interest from all over society for this type of startups. This is what we saw. In terms of investment volume, I don't have details about this.
Do you have any signals from your startups? Do they say we're fundraising and we have some kind of interest being shown towards our product?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of the features of Health Hub, that we also showcase the startups fundraising, but I don't have exact numbers at the moment.
Do you think the Corona time, for example, also for XUND in particular, will also have some impacts on your runway, on your investment opportunities? There were some kind of also incentives to invest in this time to double the investments. Did you also think to use this opportunity for yourself?
Yeah, but it wasn't successful. So in terms of AWS, that's a different topic because it was done before the lockdown. So the legal opinion of AWS was that we are not applicable for this program. But yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of interest coming from investors. So there's market validation, there's investment capital, there's interest from corporations to cooperate now, and so everybody wants to be part of it. But for us as startups, not everybody has already some footprint in healthcare. So there are some VCs or investment funds which are focused on digital health, and they have some track record, which is talking about us would be fine now because we need some strategic investor. So I would recommend other colleagues and other startups to look out for them because now the choice is there. You can pick the best ones.
Marine, you mentioned that especially Lukanos, but Michael as well, and yourself have background in this digital health. How important do you think is this fit, especially between founders and investors, especially in the field of HealthTechs, when it comes to understanding them, understanding their problems, and maybe also understanding their capital need, because the product development time might be much longer than for regular startup?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the chemistry is like, it's top priority. It's not just the fund that picks the startup, but it's also the startup that picks the fund. And so there really needs to be this understanding of the issues. And yeah, I mean, yeah. So. You don't want to share it with no problem. No. I asked 2 questions and it was confusing. I forgot them myself. I was going to ask Sabria something as well in terms of your portfolio. Do you advise your startups to look for investors who understand health tech space, or do you say look for any money that comes across your path?
Well, because of the huge interest for digital health now, I think the founders can be a bit more mindful about this. In general, I think it's important, and this is what we offer in our program for startups who apply, to get mentoring from people who are very aware of not only regulations and data protection and so on, but also previous founders who went through this and understand. I think this is what comes from them as well. Previous founders who understand the full process and have seen it all. So this is something that we offer as well for the startups to get some advice from people who don't have direct interests, so that they can give advice that is a bit more neutral as well.
But do you co-invest with other investors, for example?
Yeah. Yes. This is one of our. So we co-invest, and that is why, for instance, we have a lot of investments with Speed Invest, like Doctorly or ThinkSono, or High Health, and These are this is our top priority. We're not working against other funds, but we're working with them. And I think that was your previous question.
Yes.
Sorry, I just
one addition, Sabria, because you have a lot of applications from international startups as well. What are the current trends in terms of, I don't know, products, solutions, technology? Are they looking, what kind of products are they building currently?
There are a lot of things. Of course, telemedicine solutions are very important and leading the field, I think. Or it's a dedicated guess, it's not a database, but there are a lot of telemedicine solutions. But also, we're not only talking about this, we're talking about empowering the patients, giving them information about their own health data through monitoring wearables. We're talking about expert systems, which is following the rise of artificial intelligence. So I'm sure you've been following that a lot of algorithms are able to detect, for example, cancer or things like that in a very good way. We're talking about everything that can also relieve the healthcare system by making it more efficient, and this has been really important during COVID. For example, triage of patients through digital tools, so chatbots that are able to say, okay, this person is really urgent, they should go to the ER, this other person can wait until tomorrow. We have some examples with Stadler, for example, that has been during COVID making a sorting algorithm together with Senecura called the eCovid-19. They have been also previously collaborating with them by giving them the opportunity to, snap a photo of the skin and then get information about the disease. We've had also examples with the Austrian Development Agency, the ADA, who's been collaborating with MedTech to help doctors in the Middle East and Africa get more educated about the symptoms of COVID, as well as many other pilot projects and so on that were developed within this time frame. Yeah.
Jeannette, did you feel that boost also on the side of new clients, so to say? Did you have a lot of people asking you to help them with these regulatory or data protection issues, to guide them, let's say, in their founding period or beyond that?
We've also had quite some requests regarding to the data protection point, because as a lawyer I would prescribe to look at this at a very early stage before you start technically and so on designing your tool, because as you said, the technical design and development takes quite some time and is also very costly, and it would be kind of like very bad if you would have to do a few reruns and cycles just to get this GDPR compliant. So we have been quite addressing this data protection angle, and also with the medical device regulation, this has become a huge topic due to kind of like everyone was thinking they need to get compliant and ready until May 2020, and so kind of like there was quite some requests there, and also quite some relief that they have more time to prepare for this.
Do you think if as early when the startup begins building their product, they consider these legal issues, do you think they're then much easier to solve in the process as well? Do they just, let's say, go along and not cost as much as they would when you have to fix it later on?
I think if you start thinking about these legal and regulatory things at a very, very early stage, it of course saves you time in the process and potentially also costs, because if you need to redesign kind of like the digital app because it's not data protection compliant, the worst case is you need to start all over again, or you need to start over some significant parts. So of course it saves you a lot of time and also money.
Maybe, so to say, instead of only talking about regulation from my side on the negative side, Marine, can it also be a USP if you find a startup which is compliant with all of so to say the regulatory frameworks? Could you consider it a USP as well for you to invest?
Sure, of course, yeah.
I met a specialist from China in that case, and I had the impression that he's, so to say, being honest with me, and he said if he had a European startup and Chinese startup, and European with the same product, and the Chinese startup wouldn't comply with the data protection regulative and the European would, that he would definitely choose the European startup for his investment. You think that that would be mindset of investors in the future as well, that they would appreciate the regulatory compliance? Lukas, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely, because difference is that the first wave of digital health startups probably built their business models on data. And with the GDPR, it's not possible, because you have to define how to collect, store, and share data. So you have to think differently. And I agree with you that it can be a USP for us as Europeans and the GDPR in general to develop new business models, much more sustainable business models built on trust.
That's what I was trying to so to say discuss. Do you see that in your portfolio as well? Is that international mindset? Do they say, oh my goodness, Europe, you have all this data protection? Or do they see it maybe as an asset in terms of gaining trust with the consumers when you comply with this regulation?
I think it's definitely something that they put forward as a positive point in their sales pitch. Yeah. So this is and anyhow, since they come to us to collaborate with Europe-based pharma companies and insurances and possibly other players, then of course they need to show the good hand and show that they're ready to be compliant. Yeah.
What I forgot to ask you, do you have any calls going on, or is it permanent scouting that you're doing? How can anybody join Health Hub?
Yeah, so you can join us on the website of HealthTechs Vienna. There's a field where you can register. We had to digitalize the whole concept because it was based on sprints that happened physically, where you would learn about the Austrian ecosystem and meet the partners. But obviously, this is not possible anymore. So what we're doing is we are actually turning this into an educational platform where startups can get ready to learn about the use case and the local regulations, so that they're ready to pitch their pilots to the partners, and so that both sides are perfectly aligned. Because a lot of things happen with physical contact, chit chat and so on, where you can find your way around, and maybe a bit harder with digital, with the number of conference calls that are going on. So yeah, we're digitalizing the offering, so you can find information on the website.
Perfect. Maureen, you mentioned that you did 14 investments in the past 3 months.
Yeah, 4 months.
Are you still digesting them, or can somebody apply for the next investment?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, we're still actively looking for startups. So you can reach out to us on the website. You can also just write on LinkedIn. There's a lot of people do that too. So yeah, still actively looking for startups.
Jeannette,
yes.
What is, so to say, next to come in the next 12 months in terms of medical device regulation? What does this period mean for startups? How can you help them get ready? And the second question, what is the sanction if you don't comply, so to say, with this regulation? Do we have fines, or what does it mean?
Kind of like speaking in terms of data protection, the fines are quite aggressive. So it's 4% or 2% of the turnover of the startup. I mean, this is kind of like not so bad if you're a startup and you do not have so much turnover. But if you would have an investor, there are kind of like sometimes they calculate from the entire group. So the fines are quite aggressively. So I wouldn't recommend being non-compliant with data protection laws. And also kind of like with the medical device regulations, there are fines if you do not comply. And if you haven't registered the product there, you are technically not allowed to distribute it. Mm-hmm. So these are huge risks here. And of course, we're also always happy to host workshops, to educate on the regulations. And also kind of like to add one point, I think, yes, regulations are burdensome. It's quite a process to be compliant. But on the other side, it also is a trust builder for the investors and also for the consumers. So I think this can be a special point for marketing to say, we are compliant, we respect your data, and this could be also some boost for the startup and for the takeoff.
I think this is a very good point, Lukas. I think you're going this path, yeah?
Absolutely the core, yeah.
Do you have it in your email signature where, so to say, compliant with this and that regulation?
We have it on our marketing materials, yeah. So, I mean, that's something we are telling since we started. And yeah, I mean, I've probably nothing to add because it's just, I see it as an advantage for us.
Marketing is the one thing, but do you also have any data or maybe any studies that also the consumers buy these products more than those who are not certified? Is it so to say USP as a product?
I don't have any specific data in mind, but I would guess so.
Health Hub? Probably the same.
Yeah.
I remember Symptoma founder was telling me that for him this is a big asset also in, let's say, gaining trust from the consumers, especially versus the international competition who does not apply with this regulation. So we on the one hand discussed the regulation as, let's say, slowing down the innovation process, but at the same time it seems to be an asset when growing internationally, when you come to the customers who are not used to their countries, so to say, embracing this regulation.
I think it's fundamental, and also if we go away from of course it's very important from the business point of view, but as a citizen itself, I think knowing that your data is not going to be put out there or sold to another company that has other interests, I think is very important. And the conclusion, let's say, maybe if I may, that of course regulations are a burden sometimes, but I think they're one of our assets as well in Europe, I would say, because we are pushing startups to create products that are respecting these kind of boundaries. Yeah.
The same goes with the complexity of the stakeholder landscape. So although it is hard in the beginning to understand all the stakeholders and to comply with them and cooperate with them, when you find it out and when it works, then it's an advantage against other countries, I believe so. Yeah.
And I think it's important to look at it from that perspective as well. Obviously, there's also unnecessary regulation out there, and we don't need that. But when it's meaningful and when it serves the consumers, I think we could embrace it as well. And I was maybe more critical in the past, but I've seen investors and startups, and especially the consumers, appreciate complying with this regulation and building products that comply with this regulation. That can be an asset, especially also on the international parquet.
If you take a step on the side, you can see the increased popularity of VPNs, for example. It's a good example of email services that are not selling your data. I think this is a sign that the consumer is getting more aware of their privacy and so on.
And maybe to add to this, kind of like this is the data protection aspect, but also kind of like the medical device regulation aspect. It is a product that tries to predict your disease or kind of like monitor your disease. And this is also kind of like a very important factor, I believe, for kind of like the health you have and the health you might risk if this product will be malfunctioning. So,
on that note, if you need help, Jeannette will help you very gladly to comply with these regulations. Thank you guys for all these insights and inputs. I hope that the boost remains for HealthTechs. I think it's an important product. I mean, you serve the patients. The patients are the ones who will profit from your products, from your investments, from your activity, and obviously at the end of the day also from your legal support. Thank you for all these insights, and please keep us posted on further developments on the regulation in case something changes, in case the date will be postponed or shortened, or I don't know what happens. In case the next regulation comes, we'll be happy to discuss it again to help our community understand both the necessity but also the chances when applying and complying with this regulation. Thank you for being with us. That was all for tonight's Rooftop Talk with Stadler, Völkel, attorneys at law from Vienna, from our rooftop. We were careful tonight, so we went inside in case it would rain. It's kind of unstable weather in Vienna this time. We could have made it outside today, but it's a nice atmosphere here in this class as well. So I hope you enjoyed the location as well. Thank you for being with us, and we see you tomorrow. Ciao.